Welcome to another episode of Catholics Against Militarism podcast. I'm excited to have back Father Emmanuel Charles McCarthy, my favorite guest. Thank you for being with us today, Charlie.
Okay, Helen, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I thought we could talk about the anniversary of the Battle of Lepanto, which is on Monday, which is October 7th. And I thought we should bring this up because if listeners of my channel, especially if you're on YouTube, if you go to the playlist, top questions and answers about gospel nonviolence, you will see a list of the most popular questions and Father McCarthy's answers. And one of them is, what about Hitler? Which is that was my hook to all of this gospel nonviolence.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Good.
It was a good one. But the other one that's come up that we've never answered on the show is, what about the Battle of Lepanto? And so I thought we should talk about that, what that was and why people tend to think that this was like the ultimate example of the just war. And I think probably when people bring up Lepanto, they're talking about two things. They're talking about the fact that they believe the war itself was an example of a just war. And then they're also talking about an example of what they believe was divine intervention to help the Christians. And so, perhaps you could enlighten us a little bit, Father McCarthy, about the history of this battle, if you know about it. And then what would you say to people who said, what do you mean there's no just war? What about the Battle of Lepanto?
Well, I am certainly glad that your viewership has so much interest in maritime affairs, you know? It really is nice to hear that they spread out a little and they're just not all focused on the church, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
You know
first of all, the
can I
Battle of
just a random note. I was talking with a friend today and we were looking up on Chat GPT the most niche dating sites. You know how they have these websites where you can date people?
I don't know a thing about what's GPT?
Chat GPT, it's like an artificial intelligence answer. Like you can type something in and it will give you an answer. Anyway, one of the most top 5 niche dating websites was a dating website specifically for sea captains who want to
Very
date
good.
other sea captains. And I just thought
Very good.
that was very funny. But anyway, so maybe some of those sea captains are listening today.
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, the sea captains that I've known two, very nice people and
Yeah.
highly learned, of course, huh?
Yeah. Well, you could tell them about the
Yeah, so
dating
maybe
sites.
maybe your audience is just that this is one of their hobbies to keep in touch with the navigation in the maritime world. So
Yeah.
very good. They want to know about the Battle of Lepanto.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the Battle of Lepanto was a naval battle. But what people don't know is that it was the last naval battle of its kind in Western history.
Really? I didn't know that. Well, I don't know
It
much
was a
about
large battle, that's for sure. So, and the reason that it's the last naval battle of its kind is because it's the last naval battle that was done with everyone having ships that were rowed, galley ships that were rowed.
Oh.
So that the battle wasn't like the battleship Missouri firing into Japan or something, huh? The battle was actually an infantry battle of men fighting on floating planks. They were still bashing each other with private clubs and heads and spears and knives and fists and everything.
Really?
Yes, that's how it was fought. They jumped the ships and fought.
They didn't have like cannons that like
No cannons. It wasn't that. Nope. Those things
Oh,
didn't exist.
I did not
So
know that.
the Battle of Lepanto was
Displaced.
was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
It was, it was. I mean, all battles are brutal, of course, but this was face to face, hand to hand combat, and really quite something that most people wouldn't know. But it's the kind of battle that was fought by naval operations up until that time.
Okay.
After
And it was
after this new weapon technology came in,
Mhm.
and the cannons and blah, blah, blah. But this is infantry battle on floor wood.
Okay, and it was
So
taken
that's first of all, and I'm sure your readership knows that, and that's what they want to find out about what's that's like, you know?
yeah,
It,
I guess, and I should mention that this was 1571.
October 7, 1571, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the way that battle went. And as I say, it's the last of its kind, really, in the history of naval warfare. After this, the cannons come in, and the other stuff comes in that's really different and makes it more or less a long distance thing, in Navy.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's the Battle of Lepanto kind of set out there. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it was a battle that it was a battle that, how should we say this? It was a battle that was um, absolutely positively against all Catholic teaching.
Wait, wait,
Even though,
wait.
even though,
Yeah, I'm looking on my phone right now as you're talking. So,
yeah, even though, even though the Battle of Lepanto had the Pope's navy fighting in it. The Pope
but
had a navy at that
it
time.
said it was called the Holy League.
The Holy League, the Holy League was a group of European monarchs that put together under the under the leadership of one of them, a group of naval boats and stuff to go out and to fight the Muslims,
The Ottoman
go out and
Empire.
attack the Muslims.
Yeah.
And the papal navy was part of that armada. So
Okay.
the Pope had a navy, just like now he has an army, right? It's a
Yeah.
mercenary army, but it's his army under his absolute, he's commander in chief. We seldom think of that, but the Swiss Guard is a real army. And
Yeah.
if you go to Rome and you ever get a chance to look at what the Swiss Guard's arsenal is, it is the best weapons in the world for killing people. It is major league army. And of course, all the Swiss Guard are Swiss soldiers that were trained like American SEALs,
Okay.
it is a lethal force.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the Pope's army now, which he is commander in chief, total commander in chief. They can't do a thing ultimately without his orders.
Wow.
So anyway, the Pope then, he was the admiral in chief for this.
Yeah.
And he sent them with the Holy League out to attack the Muslims who he felt was going to attack us. I mean Catholics,
Yeah.
And so the first thing that makes it an unjust war, is that it was a preemptive war. It was a preemptive war. It's not the Muslims that fired the first shot. It was the Catholics that did it. And
Okay.
they went to the Muslim, they went to the Lepanto Bay
Yeah.
to
Where's
attack
that?
the Muslims in Greece. They
Oh,
went to Lepanto Bay to attack the Muslims, and the Muslims hadn't attacked Rome or Italy or anything as of that point. So it was a preemptive war, and preemptive war has been excluded from the time of Augustine. That is, the only war that is allowed is when you are actually defending yourself against an attack that has been made.
and did the Muslims have a right to be there where they were in Greece?
The Muslims were there at the bay in Greece. That was their port. That was a big port for them, a major port.
So they were like in their own port.
Right. In other words, they were also a collection of naval forces, huh?
Okay.
But I once took the trip from Italy to Greece on a boat, huh?
Hmm.
And it's a good distance. It's a few days. It's a couple of days. It's
Okay.
a couple of days. This is This has to be a real plan. If you're going to, an armada of 200 plus boats, this is
Yeah.
a real planning session to go in and surprise and attack and all that sort of
Oh,
business there.
wow.
So what they did was what was what is disallowed by Catholic just war theory, which is attacking people on your belief that's their intention to attack.
Right. Like we did in Iraq.
Good point. Excellent point. It's almost like we had this plan, but we didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't say a word before this. But
Yeah.
in 1990, after Pope John Paul II, 55 times condemned going into Iraq, this is prior to the war,
Hmm.
and said it was unjust.
Yeah.
The power elites in the United States sent two of their intellectual honchos, Michael Novak and George Weigel, to talk to the Vatican about this is a legitimate war. It is not preventive. It's not preemptive. And their point was the Battle of Lepanto.
Oh, really?
They used it.
How did you know
And,
that? How did you know
and
that?
the reason we know that was it is because after the fact, see, they went to the Vatican, and to the Vatican's credit, they didn't let them in the front door. They didn't let them talk to anybody. They said, "Get out. This is not your business. Get out." You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was obviously a real crushing thing to them, since those two thought that they were in tight with the Vatican.
Yeah.
You're not in tight with the Vatican unless you're in the Vatican, you know? But anyway, Ellen, they went and they were just thrown away and just, and so forth. I think they held a little thing at the American embassy, but that's not what the plan was. The
Okay.
plan was to actually talk to the Pope, because Weigel had written a book on the Pope that had
Oh,
so forth, a biography.
yeah.
So Witness to Hope, I think it was called. Anyway, so these spiritual honchos of the theological honchos of the political elite in the United States who wanted the war, neocons, um,
Mm.
they they went and they got rebuked,
Okay.
because it was not it was a preventive war, and you can't do that. So
Hmm.
later on, after this was, in fact, I think it was quite a while after, Michael Novak did write a piece in which he used the Battle of Lepanto to say that, publicly, put it in the National Review, William Buckley's magazine, to
Yeah.
say that the Battle of Lepanto was the model for what was going on in Iraq, what you mentioned,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
that it was legitimate, and then that was really self-defense, because they were making an attack against an attack that was planned if they didn't make the attack, which is, yeah. All right. So the battle, but anyway, no one even talks about that in the Battle of Lepanto. They don't even care about that, no more than they care about the fact that this was infantry warfare on wood, floating on wood, you know?
Hmm.
It just sits in the head as something, right? And
It sits in
and
their head as something. Okay.
you
Yeah.
know,
And
now,
and this is way after the Crusades, right? This is
oh
yeah.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
1571. Yeah, the Crusades are over by this time. Yeah.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part about that. It is not after the Inquisition. It's right during the Inquisition, the Holy Roman Inquisition. And the man who sent them and justified it and everything else, the Pope, was Pius V. And Pope Pius V, before he became Pope, was Grand Inquisitor of the Inquisition. That was his job before becoming Pope, the Dominican Grand Inquisitor,
Oh,
right?
okay.
As a matter of fact, I think, I may be wrong on this, but I think Pius V was the first Pope to wear the white. Because if you've seen pictures of Dominicans, they wore those white garments, and so forth and so on. And he wore that. And I think he's the first one to wear the white. And
Oh,
it
interesting.
just went on after him. But anyway, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is that this man had this man could kill. And he rose to the top in the echelons of the Catholic Church by being Grand Inquisitor, which a man you did not mess with in those days. His
Okay.
power was almost absolute. And he rose to the top and then went on to become Pope. And then the Battle of Lepanto followed.
Okay. All right. And so they must have thought that they needed to hold back the Muslims, like,
Oh, that's what they thought. Yeah, no. They were very, very convinced that the only way to stop Islam and so forth and so on was to kill him. You know,
hmm,
as Colin Powell said at the beginning of the Iraq War, is word for word the quote: "Our job is to cut them off and kill them."
uh-huh. Okay.
That was the idea.
Okay. And so
So
they
th-
went and attacked and so okay, a lot of people never, but what about the whole thing with like they prayed the rosary and then like Mary was supposed to like give them the victory or something like this? I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I haven't done a ton of research for this, but for this episode. But what
you're
about that?
jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead.
Oh, I am. Okay, what's the next piece of this story then?
The next piece is this, Ellen. Saying this, everything has to be contextual.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not contextual, as an isolated fact or incident, it's not. It's not. It doesn't mean the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So, what is important now is to look at what the Battle of Lepanto is to the average middle class, everyday, ordinary Catholic in church, whether it's the Pope or the bishops or the cardinals or the priests or the deacons talking at the pulpit on October 7th. Now, I've heard some atrocious sermons on October 7th, absolutely atrocious.
In,
Uh,
in terms of
a
support.
Lepanto,
Okay.
you know, basically revolving around one thing and one thing only. The Blessed Mother gave the victory to the Catholics.
That's what I've always heard. Yeah.
Greg Kerbaway, our mutual friend,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Greg Kerbaway recently heard a sermon on, this is last year, I guess, on in his church it's a weekday on the Battle of Lepanto given by a priest from Nigeria in his parish who was talking there that morning. And he gave the sermon and he gave that exactly what we just said, the Blessed Mother assured and gave the victory to the Catholics over the murderous, sinful Muslims, etc. So Greg, as he went back into the sacristy after, and he said, "Well, that's not the teaching of the church. That's your own opinion." And this priest from Nigeria now, which means he's learning this over there, he said, no theologian, no pope, no historian, serious historian, ever thought the victory came from anyone else than the Blessed Mother. What do you say?
Which is maybe kind of true. Maybe everyone does think
It
that.
is how he was taught
Yeah.
over in Nigeria, wherever he was from,
Yeah.
So what it is today is a disaster in the Catholic mind, a spiritual disaster. And it's a spiritual disaster because the average Catholic, depends upon, for the most part, symbols and things that are said from the pulpit and not the study of deep theology to lead him or her in his faith. So, for example, the Rosary is a Marian devotion, a devotion to the Mother of Jesus, Mother of God. And like so many, it's supposed to be, and it is, I guarantee it is, an aid to salvation offered by the church, but it is in this case being utterly misinterpreted and misused. and it's being misinterpreted and misused. And not only is it being misinterpreted and misused, the Blessed Mother is being blasphemed. Blasphemed. Every place you go, every pulpit you stand in front of on October 7th, you will hear that Mary, through the rosary, helped the Catholics destroy the Muslims by the thousands, in
Mhm.
that battle.
Yeah.
And it was a major battle. It was a major, major battle.
Yeah.
And say they did it by praying the rosary. They don't say how many, some say by the whole city of Rome, walking around in a circle, praying the rosary, or the Pope, and on and on. But what they make the rosary into is a death-dealing weapon for the home team. For the
Mhm.
home team. Not Mary, who's mother of all, the universal church, the mother of Jesus, who came to save all people, whose father is the father of all from New Testament.
Yeah.
No, this is a Mary that's real partisan. And you not only hear it from the pulpit, I, you know, I spent a lot of time at Notre Dame as a student and a teacher and so forth there. And I think in my first, let's say 58, probably till 70 or something like that, all those years, I was oblivious to it, never thought anything about it. But, and I'll send you a picture of it, but immediately to the right, immediately to the left, rather, of the main altar, the high altar, it's at the Basilica, no less, which is a Pope's church, of the Sacred Heart on the Notre Dame campus. There is a beautiful stained glass window, the likes of which you could not get today in the United States or any place. It was done in the 1870s over in France and brought in by the founder of Notre Dame, a priest by the name of Sorin. There is a huge picture of the Blessed Mother in heaven blessing the Catholics as they have their swords out and their daggers out and their whatever those things were that they used to crush people's heads, killing Muslims. I never thought a thing about it for 12 years. It was just, yeah, that's what I learned, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, what the heck is this doing next to the altar? With a sacrifice of the nonviolent Jesus in a nonviolent way, saying, love your enemies as he died. It made absolutely no sense. And I brought it to people's attention, but water off a duck's back,
Yeah. Yeah.
as it is any place. So what's taking place here, Ellen, with the Battle of Lepanto is not that people are investigating it theologically and factually and so forth and so on and know about it. What it has become is a symbol for those who are just warists in the church. Just a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to a symbol does not necessarily have to relate directly to reality if it's thought it does.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows and that's a symbol that allows the Blessed Mother to become violent. Jesus, of course, along with her, because you only pray to Mary. He does the real work.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows the church to say that Jesus supported the violence of the Catholics against the Muslims. In other words, it utterly distorts the image of Jesus and Mary in the Gospels. It just distorts it completely.
Yeah.
And so that's where we stand in relationship to what the Battle of Lepanto is in fact in human existence today, and has been for a long time, since those pictures on the wall at the stained glass windows inside of the high altar at Notre Dame were made in 1871 in France, or because the Nigerian priests He said,
Yeah.
this is the only interpretation we ever heard of it. It isn't anything. He almost laughed at Greg that he would say that there's a problem with it.
Yeah.
At any rate, it may be the place to start with this is this. In the end, you and I, St. Augustine, St. Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, or everyone who is a Christian, the ultimate moral norm for their existence has to be, the ultimate moral norm has to be Jesus of the Gospels. There is no place else to go for anyone. That's as far back as you can get.
Mhm.
And what's said there is what Jesus was and is, and that's the official teaching of the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
That what is presented in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is in fact a true presentation of the historical Jesus passed on to us by the apostles. That is the dogmatic, not the doctrine, the dogmatic constitution on Revelation, section 18 and 19 in Vatican II documents.
Mhm.
Now, that being the case, there's no way that you're going to get Lepanto, you're going to get World War II, you're going to get the Iraqi war, you're going to get anything that Constantine did with war and those after him. There is no way you're going to get Jesus or his mother Mary to be supporters of such a thing, any war. So that with Mary, as a matter of fact, if one believes the New Testament and the Gospels are revelation, and actually revelation of God's will is revealed by Jesus, the very last words of Mary in the Gospel, the very last words she says is, do whatever he tells you.
Mhm.
And what is her son, the nonviolent Jesus, tells us is not violence. It's nonviolence, love of enemies, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, here's the terrible thing about it, say, and I don't know how far to go with this in terms of taking time to explain it. But using a contemporary example, outside of the Catholic Church, outside of Christianity, going to and in fact existing today, Gaza.
Also October 7th, right?
Also October 7th.
Yeah.
And Gaza does not come into existence out of a vacuum. It doesn't just all of a sudden it's there October 7th.
Mhm.
Netanyahu, the Jewish people around him, the Jewish people who support him, the Jewish people who support him financially or actually go to war with him, do not just arise in a vacuum on October 7th. They arise out of a history of justified murder for that piece of land.
Mhm.
And they're nurtured in this, nurtured in it day in and day out, not just through the Old Testament, but through Talmudic teaching. It is deep. It is deep. I was brought up with it,
Well,
but
yeah,
I'm
then it
not
kind of
Jewish.
I think it's, yeah, Talmudic, but then it kind of infiltrated like the evangelical Christian
It's a kind of. I often joke that the Talmud does for the teachings of the prophets and so forth in the Old Testament. What it does for them is what Catholic moral theology does for the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. It modifies it out of meaning of existence.
I've often
And
thought that when it comes to just war theory, it's like a
there
Talmudic
is no
summary.
just war theory in the Old Testament. None. Absolutely none. Zero. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's a pagan thing from Cicero. It doesn't exist. They don't know just war theory.
Mhm.
War in the Old Testament is by God's command, period. God
Mhm.
wants you to do it, you got to do it, individually or collectively.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
But when Phineas finds the woman, the married woman and the man copulating, and he sticks a sword in their genitals at the time that they're copulating, when he does that, he does it because that's God's will, not
Mhm.
because it's right or it's God's will, and you do God's will.
Yeah.
So, so what takes place here is
Mm.
that the first instance that Jewish children are nurtured in, from the cradle to the grave, for over 2,000 years, well over 2,000 years, that Netanyahu was nurtured in, that his followers are nurtured in, that those who are killing for him are nurtured in. The
Mhm.
first instance of that is, and nurtured deeply, and I was too, but not that kind of deep, but I was just part of my Catholic way, the
Mhm.
Battle of Jericho.
Yeah. Okay.
The Battle of Jericho supposedly takes place in the 15th century under Joshua. Okay. And Joshua, you could find in the book of Joshua, Joshua 6 or something. But anyway, the Battle of Jericho is the first battle in in the Old Testament. It is the first battle that is that is there and taken under and chosen and participated in. It is the first battle to steal the land of the natives on that land for the Jewish people.
Oh.
The first one. In
Okay.
other words, it's always seemed strange to me that whatever you want to say of God's promise that gives the land in Palestine to the Jewish people, at
Mhm.
least some of the land, it's always seemed strange to me. I don't see the permission in that to kill people to take the land. God is going to give it. And
Mm.
God doesn't say, I am giving you the power to kill people to take it. He
Mm.
says, I am going to give it. So this is the first time back in memory, the Jewish people go about the business of declaring war to take a piece of the land that people are living on in Palestine. The direct relationship between that and the present is clear. But even more, the Battle of Jericho, which God orders, by the way, at least Joshua tells the people God orders it. Joshua was a warlord, a distant warlord. Joshua tells the people that God orders it. And what takes place is they believe him, they follow him, they go in, and then he tells them God orders the massacre of every man, woman, and child in Jericho. The line from Jericho to Gaza is complete. And it's never been anything else over the entire time from approximately 1500, when this story was there, to today. In fact, Netanyahu even mentions it. And
I
he
know.
mentions
I've
the ethnic cleansing of the Amalekites in the Old Testament.
I know I've been meaning to go back because I've gotten snippets of his speeches that he's given since October 7th of last year, and I've been meaning to go back and read the full transcripts because I'm like, he's just blatantly saying because we were allowed to do this in the Old Testament, like
That's what he's
8,000 years
saying, and
ago,
that's
we can
and
do it now.
God allowed us, and God told us, and therefore,
But do you think that he really like he's actually a religious man who believes those things, or is this just an excuse? Like,
what his conscience is on this, I don't know.
yeah.
But what I do know is that you can be an atheistic Jew,
Hmm.
strangely enough, and believe that God gave you the Holy Land of Palestine.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's
No,
cultural. It's
it is.
deep. It's
Yeah.
for 2,000 years after the absolute destruction of Jerusalem, and the Jews were thrown out in 70 AD, and then later with Bar Kokhba in 135 AD, when they tried it again. When it was absolutely empty of Jews, the phraseology was for Jews right up until our own time, until 1948. The words were, the actual words were, next year in Jerusalem. Next year in Jerusalem. That was a greeting. That was a way of partying. That was a way of talking, just being
What does that mean?
identity next year in Jerusalem.
And what did they mean by that again?
They meant going back to the Holy Land.
Oh, okay.
They
Wow.
meant going back to the Holy Land. They didn't interpret Jerusalem at that time analogously as a spiritual thing or so forth and so on. But anyway, Netanyahu, yeah, he as a Jewish person, I absolutely feel that he is saturated with all the efforts at conquest in the Old Testament that we could read about, see about conquest of the people of Palestine, regardless of what they're called at the time, in order to get that land,
Mm-hmm.
to keep that land.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and so the line between Jericho and Gaza is direct, but it's direct because human beings who are Jewish religion, Jewish culture, passed it on to their children in the cradle, onward and out, and therefore, just like Christians passed it on as something that was God's will and didn't pass on the nonviolent Jesus of the gospel,
Yeah.
this is how this comes about.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a symbol. Jericho is a symbol.
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you something else. The Battle of Jericho never happened. It's a non-existent fable.
Well, how can you say that if it's in the Old Testament?
The consensus of scholarship is that it was a myth created by the king of Judah, I think around 772. Remember, the battle is supposed to take place in the 15th century. A myth created by the king of Judah as nationalistic propaganda for taking more land. And then it was placed in the book. It was written. And then after the return from Babylon, it was a few things embellished in it and so forth and so on, until we have it as we have it today. But scholarship shows that it's a myth.
I feel like this is where people are gonna
created
not like
over layers of time, but the battle itself has no basis historically at all, and that is the consensus of scholarship.
really. And that's is that like
Consensus of
even
scholarship.
Catholic theologians believe that? Like,
They have to believe it's scholarship.
yeah. Wow.
Catholic theologians, biblical theologians, absolutely positively know it never happened. There
Wow.
is no evidence in archaeology, not a drop of evidence, that in the 15th century, that even a Jericho was there, let alone that there were walls and that there was what it was. Now, Jericho, by the way, just parenthetically to tell you,
Mhm.
Jericho is a real city. It's a real city. It
Mhm.
may be the oldest continuing city in the world.
Really? Wow.
It's right next to the Dead Sea, which is the lowest place in the world. It's really down in the desert, huh?
Mhm.
And the reason that it could be such a populated place is because there are streams of water that run underneath it that people can access. They're
Oh,
in the desert, but the water is underneath them, but it's not any place else in the desert. It just goes into to the sea.
oh wow. Okay.
But so that's, and if you look at a picture of it even today, it's fertile, crops and everything else.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and that's why it wasn't Jesus' day. They say people went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, like the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
used to go there because it was a good place to live. They
Oh,
visited people there. It was a place. The road down there was called the Bloody Path because of robbers and everything else.
Yeah.
about 13 miles. I drove it once in 66.
Really?
And yes,
It's just
and
circular?
then but it was a regular set,
Hmm.
but there was acquisitiveness in wanting that city because it had the fertile.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
now you see the picture.
yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now you see the picture.
Mm-hmm.
The first battle to acquire land was, now mind you, it's a mythical battle, but
Mm-hmm.
it was presented in terms of not just dirt. It was presented in a way that, as everyone knows, Jericho was fertile.
Right. Just like Troy was extremely wealthy.
And the
And
same thing there. And
yeah,
and and we might say Iraq has oil,
we might say, yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and or Afghanistan has heroin, poppy,
Right. Mm-hmm.
uh, so forth. But anyway,
Hmm.
in other words, there's an old, I think it might come from the Greeks, but anyway, it's as old as literature,
Mm-hmm.
that wars are fought for booty.
Right.
You can have all the myths around you about, this king being mad at that king and so forth and so on. But wars are not like people getting mad on a street corner and fighting. They are long prepared and long practiced for and so forth and so on. And when they're fought for booty. And the booty at that time included,
Mm-hmm.
all the thing you could plunder, say. But it's an interesting fact that's been brought up. The fact that Jews, who seem to have been the only people that massacred the people they conquered,
Mm-hmm.
men, women, and children, they seem to be the only people in the Mideast that did that. It has been interpreted that the reason for that, and reason that is ordered by God, is to them, so that they cannot use human beings as booty. You see, human labor was a massive form of booty. Everything was done by human labor.
Yeah.
And if you massacre all the people was not the practice, then you can't use that as an excuse for going to war. On the other hand, it says quite clearly in Joshua, in the section in Joshua dealing with the battle, that everything else was plundered and given to Joshua, not to the people, but to Joshua. And there's even a story of some guy that ran off with some of the plunder and they stoned him to death.
Oh,
But
but
be
what, why
that
did,
as it may,
but
huh?
why did the Jews kill the people why wouldn't they take them as slaves and such?
That's it. Take them, enslave them means they were having them for booty,
Okay.
the fruits of war.
Right.
They couldn't, and the idea is that this is what it's presented anyway. The idea was that God did not permit that because he did not permit human beings to be taken for
Oh, so
booty
this was
in
like a
war.
just like the genocide was an aspect of their just war.
That's right.
Oh my gosh,
Absolutely. And
I did
that's,
not know that.
and by the way, that is a common interpretation of the Jewish massacres and ethnic cleansing in the Old Testament that is used to suggest that that was God telling a most barbarous people like everyone else at that time, trying to lead them into the nonviolence of Jesus gradually.
Ah.
Just like when God at the beginning rejects Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac and
Mm-hmm.
presents a ram instead,
Mm-hmm.
a sacrifice of the firstborn was normal.
Right.
And he's trying to lead them out of that, out of the
Oh,
bloodletting.
okay.
And that's the same thing with the massacres.
So it could be like a step away from the enslavement of the
It
people
is,
and
yeah,
yeah.
it is. It's
Wow.
a step away. Now, this is not, this is all normal knowledge and scripture scholarship.
This is normal.
It is
So this is
not,
not just like a minority opinion. Like this is like,
it's not a minority opinion. It's not esoteric. It's
wow.
what's there. and that and that for the most part, um, to the outsider, like me or you, or so forth,
Mhm.
um, it doesn't make much sense, the God, it seems like it's a make-up thing that the Jews are filled of bloodlust in terms of their fighting, and as in all wars, people go crazy and they just rape, rob, plunder in any way they want,
Yeah.
and but when you see the long course of history,
Mhm.
from Abraham with Isaac all the way to the suffering servant in Isaiah, who's the epitome of nonviolence in the New Testament,
Yeah.
and who McKinsey says is the crux interpretum story of the New Testament, of the Old Testament, rather. There is a line that's as clear as the line from Jericho to Gaza, if you're going to go that route.
Yeah.
But there's another line of thought from God not wanting bloodletting that goes from Abraham through Jericho, through holy wars, that
Mhm.
they all of which are to suffering servant.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, all this is important because now Jericho, in the average Jewish mind and the average Christian mind, is perfectly acceptable. It's what God wanted in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and He ordered it, and the people did it, and we got a great song out of it. The Lord hit the battle of Jericho. The Lord fought the battle of Jericho,
Mhm.
and Paul Robeson or Mahalia Jackson singing it is unbelievable.
Mhm.
Magnificent, absolutely magnificent. But it's also on YouTube as a ditty.
Yeah.
Lord hit the battle of Jericho with little cartoon characters jumping around. In other words, it's just taken for granted knowledge that God said you could kill for that land. And that's where it's dangerous in terms of Lepanto. Lepanto is the same thing. It is an absolute wrong symbol of the reality of God and God's will.
Mm.
It's an erroneous symbol,
Mhm.
but it's passed on generation to generation from October 7, 1571,
Mm.
right to me in 1940.
Mhm.
Right to me. And I lived it and I believed it. And I didn't think a lot about it. It was just, I knew the song, The Lord Fit the Battle of Jericho. I said, oh, yeah, I knew it.
Yeah.
Just grew up with it. And
Yeah.
yeah, nothing. It was just given and taken. Sure, God did that. And
Mhm.
if God can do that there, God can do that here. And God can do that in terms of the Nazis and the Germans and the Americans and
Yeah. Although you have
whatever side God is on.
well, yeah, but you have to kind of admit, Charlie, that I mean there must be something there because if God does get involved in wars and he lets the people, the good guys win, then that would explain why, according to the history books, the good guys always win. Right? I mean, it's always the good guys who end up victorious that we're told.
That's
So
because
that
the
must
good
be
guy,
God,
the
right?
winner's right history.
Yeah,
The victor's right history is a common fact of life.
right.
And they always write history with the bad things about them left out and the good bad things about the other side put in there. And
Yeah.
always aggrandize their own greatness and goodness and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
As General Curtis LeMay said, now he was the actual head of the Air Force wing, Army Air Force wing that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And also he was head of the firebombing of Tokyo, which killed more people in one night than Hiroshima and Nagasaki together.
Mm,
And
yeah.
he said, if we had lost the war, I'd be a war criminal.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
But it's Adolf Eichmann that's the war criminal. And the guy
Yeah.
that bombed Dresden, Cologne, and all those other German cities to the tune of millions of people being burned to death and suffocating in subway systems and so forth and so on, millions,
Yeah.
Charles Harris, they got a beautiful statue for him outside of a church in Trafalgar Square. And when they unveiled the statue, every Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish, ecclesiastic was there with their full garments approving of it.
Gosh. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, what the Battle of Jericho Jericho is a symbol. The Battle of Lepanto is a symbol, an erroneous symbol of God and God's will. If Helen, Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Word of God incarnate,
Mm-hmm.
then it's an erroneous symbol of God and his will.
Right.
And yet it's perpetuated through the very church that says Jesus Christ is Lord God,
Right.
the Word of God, the Messiah. That is wrong. The church is wrong doing that. The
Mhm.
church is wrong letting that priest get up there, or any priest up there in the pulpit on October 7th, and tell people that the Battle of Lepanto was won by the Blessed Mother interceding with Jesus to give the Catholics a murderous victory over Muslims.
Yeah. And one thing that I've always heard about it is that, well, there's no way they could have won without some sort of divine intervention. But I'm just looking on Wikipedia, and again, I've done like no research on this, but it says that the Holy League had 65,000 men, and the Ottoman Empire had 67,000 men. Like there wasn't that big of a difference. I mean,
Well, yeah, I think that I think there are a lot of explanations put forward as to how, because of the surprise or everything else, even the
okay.
weather is put forward for that time. But there are a lot of, but and I know that there are thousands upon tens of thousands of battles that Christians have been involved in, the church has been involved in, and they lost them all praying to Mary and Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
Why this one?
Yeah.
This is nonsense. This is a nonsense theology that's perpetuated like Jericho
Mm-hmm.
in the Jewish community, in
Yeah.
the Catholic community, perpetuated to hold up and lift up high violent Christianity by just warists,
Yeah. And then
Catholic just.
yeah, so let's put ourselves in the other position. If we were saying that it was a miracle and like this was a just war, what are the reasons people offer to say that Lepanto was a just war? That the Ottomans were going to come take over Europe? Is
I
that it?
guess.
That's
Yeah,
it, right?
yeah.
So
Survival.
like when are we, why? And that's the same justification for the Crusades, right?
Or for Second World War, or recently, yeah, it's that they're going to take over, interfere with our economy with oil, or
Yeah. But I've just heard a
whatever.
lot of Catholics, especially lately, go, "Oh no, the Crusades were just wars because
That's right.
the Muslims would have taken over if we had not fought them off." And so you're
Yeah,
saying that you don't think that was a just war to fight off the Muslims from taking when they were
of
attacking
course
Europe and
not.
trying to take the
It
land.
can't be. If Jesus is the standard of God's will
Yeah.
and God's way, hmm, then there's no war that Christians can participate in, because God is the righteous one. God is just, and he can't say to do that. But here's the thing, Ellen, it seems to me that you're talking about these things, that is the Crusades and the Battle of Lepanto, and the Catholics killing the Protestants killing the Catholics in Europe, all during the centuries, and the Catholics and the Orthodox killing each other for 200 years after the separation in 1056 on whether the bread should be leavened or unleavened, and all this stuff there, right? You can always put a religious air on it. But when you go back and back and back and back, one thing is clear. For 300 years closest to Jesus, 300 years closest to Jesus, there is not a single sentence ever written by a Christian in 300 years, in any book, in any scroll, that justifies Christians going to war.
So,
Not one.
yeah. So do you think, and I know I'm going to ask this question because I know people who are listening are going to have
Sure,
this
go ahead,
head.
yeah.
Do you think God would have been okay with the Muslims completely taking over Europe and wiping out Christian civilization and wiping out Christians from Europe?
Well, first of all, I think that what you got here is you've got a Catholic Church at that time, Crusades, or you got a Catholic Church like you have a Catholic Church now. And that's a Catholic Church that has been engaging in violence, the acquisition of wealth, power, political power for over 1,000 years. They're
Mm-hmm.
a threat.
Mm-hmm.
They're a threat like any nation's a threat to another nation. Why? Because they have power, they have an army, they have a navy, they have access to other people that have power, army, and navy. They're a threat. This is not the Catholic Church as it was in the first 3 centuries.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the Catholic Church
Oh,
where, because they love their enemies,
oh, okay.
when Christians walked by a Roman soldier, it was said, according to one of the fathers of the church, there goes the glory of God. That's not the church. This is the church of the glory of God coming out of the barrel of a gun or at the edge of a sword.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is that Catholic Church should go. Sure, it should go. Sure, it should go. That God wants it to go in violence and everything. No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
But that Catholic Church had no more of an ability, that is the Crusades and the Battle of Lepanto, no more of an ability to love your enemies than the Catholic Church now does,
Mm-hmm.
especially where nationalistic things are concerned,
Mm-hmm.
propaganda, whatever.
It kind of reminds me of that story you tell in Behold the Lamb of Mother Teresa and how she could walk through the most dangerous parts of Calcutta and she was totally fine. Like no one saw her as a threat and like she was totally safe. And it was like not that holy people aren't sometimes killed or people aren't violent, but there was and that so she wasn't a threat. So nobody so what you're saying is if the Christianity had been in Europe what it was, the Muslims probably wouldn't have been interested in attacking or um
Not only did she walk through Calcutta's slums and so forth and so on,
yeah.
when she received the Nobel Prize in Norway, she walked through the slums of Oslo where no one will go.
Hmm.
And she did it with just a couple of her sisters, no armed guards, no anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But people knew who she was.
Mm-hmm.
And no, there was no threat. In other words, there was a Jesuit theologian who was straight on the nonviolence regarding the first 3 centuries. His name was Bob Daly,
Mm-hmm.
and he was in a he's a pretty major theologian because he was the counselor to the American bishops in one of their counselor things for scripture. Huh? He had status. He had status. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And he was anyway. Bob says in one of his books that I have here, he says that we often look at the extraordinary advance of Christianity over 300 years from a few people in Palestine to what turns out to be a major religion in the Roman Empire, all over the empire. It spreads. And yet there's no violence. There's no, it's not spread that way like
Yeah.
it was after Constantine was spread by the sword. Nothing like that exists at all. What there exists is just Christians being Christians, loving their enemies, acts of mercy towards everyone, doing what Christ would do. And that included the nonviolence. They were a threat to no one, and everyone knew that. Politically, a threat. A threat to no one, and everyone knew that, and allowed for everyone to relax and listen to what they were saying. They were not trying to take over their politics. They were not trying to take over their treasury. They weren't trying to get power. None of that was part of their existence in the first 300 years.
Yeah.
They didn't desire it. They didn't work for it, and so forth and so on. But then, of course, using the Constantinian moment as a sign on the road, it's understood that the church flipped.
Right.
It flipped, and it substitute law for love.
Yeah.
It substituted politics. This is important.
Yeah.
It substituted politics and converting people, that method and so forth and so on, what all that meant, rather than relying on the fact that God was revealed to people in the Christian life, and people being attracted to God, that God, through the Christian life.
Yeah.
And so, did you ever think about this now? We're talking about a minor religion in the empire. All right. You're sitting at you're a pagan, you're a Stoic or whatever you are, in Rome at that time. And you go to the Colosseum, it's actually the Circus Maximus, where they're having all these gladiator events, and all the persecution of Christians is taking place there after Nero in these places. And you're one of the 65,000 Romans in the audience. Just what, and you're cheering, and the emperor's there, and everyone is kind of like a football game. That's where it is. And but anyway, it's not that you don't see Christians are suffering. It's not that you don't see fear. It's not that you don't see them crying over their children dying with them in anguish. What you do see is their will to die following Jesus rather than to live following Satan. And that becomes, and what you do see is people that really believe in eternal life through Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not in Stoicism. That's not any place. That's not in the pagan world. But it's that witness of the person that is the key to opening up God to people, opening up Christianity to people. Not theology, not dogma, not that stuff there,
Yeah.
And it spread the religion throughout the empire for 300 years. Not an ounce of violence used by Christians. Now, that doesn't mean that Christians didn't sin and use violence. It means there was no approval of it in the church. Zero.
Right.
Not one document, not one book.
Yeah.
So what's lost here? What's lost here is when you do things and put into children's minds from the beginning, Jericho or Lepanto, the child will not too long figure out that if God can do that to them, he can do that to me. That is, if God can kill, hurt, maim, why am I? And as the years go on and the human being becomes more sinful and problems with life and so forth, it becomes clearer and clearer. And you try to say God is love under those circumstances. And it's, what's his name? George Carlin has that extraordinarily funny skit where he talks about God says, if you do this, I'll send you to hell. God says, if you do this, I'll, and he was Catholic, and he knew all the ways you could go to hell being a Catholic, not going to church on Sunday. He names them all. And then he says, God says this, and then God says, I love you. it's incredible piece. I mean, Carlin is vulgar and everything else, but
Yeah, it's a
he
good
hit the
point.
nail on the head. No,
Mhm.
none of that was in the first 3 centuries of Christianity.
Yeah,
God was love. You could trust him. He was going to take care of you for eternity. And you didn't need politics. You didn't need anything else. You just
yeah, yeah. For those of you who are listening, check out episodes 52 and 57. We did this a few years ago on Should a Christian Vote? And those are really good episodes. So if you're wondering whether you should vote as a Christian, it's something good to listen to. Um, I was just going to point out that, like, it seems like a one reason why people, I don't know, it seems like this is an example of maybe like the cunning of reason, because people use Lepanto and they say it's justified to protect Europe and to protect Christianity in Europe from the Muslims, right? But it says right here in Wikipedia, in my brief moment of research during this talk, Lepanto was also of great symbolic importance in a period when Europe was torn apart by its own wars of religion following the Protestant Reformation. So you're using this on the one hand to say this is what we needed to do to protect Christian Europe. But then that very thing we did became the symbol that helped to tear apart Christian Europe. Do you know what I
you
mean?
got it. It's all it's all a form of cognitive dissonance, which you
Yeah.
wrote on right quite well, and which you should do a podcast on and lay out there what's at stake here. This is not possible to hold those two things at once.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. And you add Jesus to it, and you got another layer
Yeah.
of just chaos mentally,
Hmm.
but you can't see it. Or you
Yeah.
don't care, or you just run right through it, bulldoze yourself right through it.
And then, of course,
No,
every new war is just like, well, this is just like Lepanto, and everyone thinks it's just justified. And so the thing that was supposed to protect Christianity in Christian Europe was the very thing that became a symbol for helping to, like, I just think that's wow.
and but by the way, just to say something here, I remember in an article where 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 John L. McKenzie was talking about what the Europeans did to the people who were here when they got here. North America, South America, and Latin America. Right? They did the same thing as the Jews did in Palestine. They just wiped them out one way or another. Huh?
Yeah.
Genocide is what it was. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But he makes the point that it is often construed that the people who lived here had their own wars, wherever North or South America, whatever it was.
Hmm.
But he says, as a historian, I tell you, there was no comparison between the bloodbaths of Europe that the Christians carried out against each other and the wars that the tribes carried out against each other. Nothing like that. Europe brought everything here that we got today. And it's a bloody, murderous Christianity that came from Europe, both as Catholic and Protestant and Orthodox, and we still live with it to this very day. It's just not. What shall we say, Alan? I would say that how how heavily is the Catholic and Protestant Orthodox Church? I don't know, 95% at least of Christians would say yes to Lepanto or what it represents.
Right.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. You killed to save. You killed to save a Catholic Church, whatever that means. I guess the institutional Catholic Church in Rome and so forth. You killed to save the Catholic Church from Muslims. You killed to save the Catholic Church from communists. You killed to save the Catholic Church from Huguenots, and it goes on and on and on. Now you may remember I sent a cartoon out a few years ago, and it was a picture of a bedraggled kind of tough guy, and he's got his arms around a Catholic Christian minister, a Jewish rabbi, and a Muslim. And it's the title of the bedraggled guy that looks tough. The title on him is War, huh? And he's saying, "Without you, I could do nothing."
Ah, yeah.
I remember that. But anyway, why would the United States government be so interested in all Pat Payton was doing with the rosary, and the rosary is, I don't know. But this is a little piece of factual information that maybe most of your hearers would not know.
Okay.
Quote, the U.S. government commissioned and issued rosaries to soldiers in World War I. They did the same thing in World War II. These rosaries were made of metal pull chain and were sometimes called service rosaries by veterans.
Mm-hmm.
In the videos in the 1950s and 1960s, these rosaries were sometimes sold in shops. Next, during Operation Desert Storm, rosaries made of paracord, the strong cording used to hold parachutes during World War II, were sent to the troops by the U.S. government.
Well, they must be
Did you know
concerned
that?
with they must be concerned with their souls.
The government's big on religion.
They really are. Yeah.
It really, the government is big on religion. And oh, Alan, you're gone.
Oh no, I'm back. I think we're both on now.
We're both on now, but
Yeah.
I'm seeing nothing.
Oh no. We can still see
There
you.
we are. There we are. I can see you now.
Okay, great.
Okay. But the government's big on religion, huh?
Sure.
They try to take care of the souls of the student. No, it's a uniting factor. Remember, Constantine, for whatever he was a clever politician.
Mm-hmm.
And he understood if there's one emperor, if there's one empire, there got to be one emperor and one God. And that's why he made Christianity the religion of the empire, or
Mm-hmm.
tolerated it. And Theodosius II made it the religion of the empire.
Yeah.
And so the rosary was uniting things for Catholics, in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they weren't praying for the enemy. They were praying for themselves, their survival, do their job,
When
win, not break down mentally or physically, or
Yeah, I've
whatever.
always thought of like when at
Very
Fatima,
private.
Mary doesn't say like pray to win. She says pray for peace. Like you're not like, you know what I mean? She's pray for an end to the war, not like to win.
And that's not George Zabilka, who was chaplain of the Hiroshima Nagasaki bomb crew, and who was a Catholic chaplain over in the South Pacific in the Second World War,
Mm-hmm.
said that he said many masses and many rosaries where the people prayed for peace, the people prayed for the well-being of the American or British servicemen, et cetera. He said it never occurred to them, or to him for the most part, to pray for a Japanese person.
Yeah.
Never occurred, never, it was outside of imagination.
Yeah. You're not going to believe this, but on Etsy for $159, you can get a rosary where the beads are actually bullets.